remember going to a Reiki teacher at 4 years old, and Denise was the Reiki master's name. And I said to her, I need to speak to you alone. She said, okay. And my mum was like, I'm so sorry. You don't need to speak to her. And she said, no, I will hold an attendance with your daughter. And she took us away to a separate room. I said to her, I'm here with a very important mission, and I'm going to go in and out of consciousness. And that's by design, and my mother is as well. But I'm currently not safe. I know too much, and I don't know how to protect my secrets. So I need you to shut me down and teach me to heal.
Good morning, Jade. So lovely to have you here and welcome to the Light Dump. I'm excited for you to share your incredibly intriguing story. So, look, I understand. What I do know is that you were born awake, conscious. Can you explain what that means and what it has meant for you?
So I was born seeing the world through extrasensory abilities, which I thought were quite normal. So my mother and I were quite telepathic. My father received a message that I was coming. When I was conceived, he turned to my mum and said, "You're pregnant, we're having a child." And my mum said, that's crazy, Bruce. You're not the one who has the knowing of things. That's my role. And he said, no, I'm 100% sure. And it was sort of the only thing that he'd really had this strong intuition about out of nowhere. And then, yeah, when I came in, to me, the first portion of my life was really easy to communicate because my mum could hear me without my speaking, which, can be normal for parents, but it would continue beyond that to, we had a connection where if I was out in my teens and I was having a hard time, I would say to her, Mum, wake up, I need to speak to you. Something's happened. And I'd come home and she would have the kettle on. It'd be 4 o'clock in the morning and she would have got my message. And I'd say, why are you awake? And she said, well, you woke me. You told me you needed to talk to me. What's happening? And so for a long time, that communication for me was quite normal. And when I experienced people, I felt I was quite confused when it came to articulating things because what people would say didn't marry up to what I could feel that they were experiencing. And so I felt a lot of confusion as to why people weren't behaving in accordance with what they were aware of. And then I realized that they couldn't actually perceive the things about me that I thought were very obvious about them. And so I learned to adapt because my communication style wasn't effective, really, to sense the space and respond to that because others weren't sensing the same thing. So my behavior seemed strange.
What age was that when you started to adapt?
When I started to adapt, it's interesting. These are some things that I actually want to talk to my parents about as well. I have intentions to create a bit of a series of the lessons that I've learned and that perspective through other people as well, because I feel like we know ourselves really deeply, but we do learn about ourselves through the mirroring that others can provide and the feedback, the echo to our voice. But I know probably it was before the age of 10. So at 4, I learned Reiki, and that was, I must have struggled before that because I remember knowing that me telling the truth all the time was getting me in trouble because I would sense that people had something going on with them that wasn't being spoken about. And I would see that as an opportunity to bring the truth into the space so that we could all feel more comfortable. And everyone else sort of seemed more comfortable to stay in the discomfort. And me bringing it to attention, addressing the elephant in the room, made people uncomfortable. And then it was in the awareness of everyone, but it looked to me being the person bringing it forward that then I would have the space kind of looking at me when it wasn't actually, I felt like it wasn't about me. So I learned that flying under the radar and not expressing the things meant that if others didn't want to deal with it, I didn't have to tackle it on my own and try and make it make sense to them. But I remember going to a Reiki teacher at 4 years old.
At 4, can we just underline this? At 4, you went to the Reiki
Yes.
teacher.
Yeah,
How did
so
that,
my
just talk
mum
us
my
through
mum
this.
took us. Yeah,
Mm.
so my mum learned Reiki, and it was very interesting because my dad thought it was a cult, and mum said, "Look, I want to take the children. They need to be attuned to Reiki. I know, I have a knowing." And they developed a bit of a language where if mum said, "I think" or "I feel," that was different to "I know." And so he kind of would trust her if she said she knew something because he'd seen through experience that she would say she knew something and then it was true. And so they sort of developed a language. And he said, I know that, mum said, I know that the children need to learn Reiki. And dad said, I'm not comfortable with that. And she said, well, but I know. And so he said, okay, well, then I need to know what it is first so that I know it's safe for my children. So my dad went and learned Reiki and then agreed and said, I don't know if I believe in this necessarily, but I don't see it to be harmful. And so if this is something that you and the children need to do, then I support that. And they took me and my two older siblings, and you're supposed to be 5 to be attuned to Reiki. And I had other ideas. When I had an idea, I would absolutely cling to it and take it to the grave. This is what's happening. I know this is the way. And if I didn't know the way, I'd be extremely distracted. But if I
You
did
were
know,
that child. You were that
yes,
child.
yes, I was like, this is the way it is, and this is why I need to do it. And so we went into the Reiki center, and Denise Crundle was the Reiki master's name. And I said to her, I need to speak to you alone. She said, okay. And my mum was like, I'm so sorry. You don't need to speak to her. And she said, no, no, I will hold an attendance with your daughter. And she took us away to a separate room. And at the time, my mum and I both didn't remember what we spoke about, but she came back out. She removed a 5-year-old from the Reiki course because she only had a limited number. And she said, this child is not ready. This 4-year-old child is. And everyone kicked up a fuss and said, but you're supposed to be 5 and my child is 5. And she said, I have spoken. This child is ready for Reiki. And so it was years later that I learned what I said to her through the remembrance of my own memory, which I checked in with my mum and I said, the room looked like this. And she said, yes. And you only went in that room that one time. She said, do you remember the conversation now? And I said, yes, I remember. I said to her, I'm here with a very important mission and I'm going to go in and out of consciousness. And that's by design. And my mother is as well. But I'm currently not safe. I know too much and I don't know how to protect my secrets. So I need you to shut me down and teach me to heal. And then I'll be back later. And she said, I see you, child. And her eyes turned purple. She said, we begin today. And then I learned Reiki. And that was, yeah. So I had that knowing to articulate the word consciousness at 4. And she saw that I remembered. And so I had made clear instructions as to what I needed from her. And so she served that and she never spoke to my mum about that conversation.
It's interesting. Something just pinged out at me then. Actually, it's interesting. Her eyes turned purple. That was what you saw.
That was what I saw. Yeah. And I actually spoke to my mum about this and I said,
Mhm.
her eyes turned purple. And my mum went, oh my goodness, I've seen that as well. And that was really validating for me because I sort of thought my imagination, they turned, did I say this conversation? I'm actually a huge skeptic.
Mm.
I was born with a knowing and then I had to assimilate into society. And the safest way for me to survive was to go unconscious. So I didn't pretend not to know. I fully believed that I was wrong. And then I would come back to consciousness and try to work with that and then be convinced again that there was something wrong with me and I would lose it and operate in the way that others were as a survival mechanism. So when I was sharing that with my mum and she validated that for me and said that she'd seen that and that she'd heard other people had seen this same thing present in this woman, that was a really affirming moment for me. Yeah.
The coming in and out of conscious awareness, was that did that happen thereafter, after that point when you were at school, say, because
Yes.
you were 4 then, and then you went on to primary school, like we all do,
Yes.
and you went to
Yes.
a normal Australian primary school,
I
right?
did. Yes. Yes. I had
And
very, very loving family. I went to a Catholic primary school. My dad was agnostic or atheist at the time, and my mum was Catholic. And so we were baptized into the church and went to school that way. And then we decided which high school to go to. But in primary school, I remember that my parents always wanted to present different ways and for us to decide. So
Mhm.
mum sort of said, look, this education in Catholicism has served me in some ways, and these healing modalities, she was very into metaphysics and those kinds of things. So when I went to school, there was a big divide in the way that I saw the world and the way that others did. And I was just perpetually confused because I didn't know which things others were aware of and what they saw, and there was some conflict there. So I was raised that we can heal ourselves, which I still know to be true, and others at school weren't addressing things the same way. So if I hurt my knee, I
Mm.
would I would look into, what am I not wanting to bend to? Am I being stubborn? I'm not using my knees. Why is this area of my body holding tension? And they would hit their knee and, oh, I just was clumsy and hit my knee. And there was no
Mm.
meaning to
Mm.
things. And so for me to kind of relate with people, there was no purpose to anything. Nothing made sense. We were just doing random things and being told, pay attention to this whiteboard. And when I asked questions of the teachers, I found that fundamentally, sometimes they didn't know. Like I would ask a question and I would kind of hit the end of their knowledge, and then they would be upset that I was a know-it-all, but I
You were
genuinely was just curious.
confronted. They were
Yeah, I
confronted
was
by you.
trying
Yeah.
to understand because I was like, what you're saying doesn't make sense to me, and everyone's saying it's right, so I feel like I'm being left out of the truth because I see something else. But it was just sort of, you know, yeah, I
Mm.
managed to assimilate enough to fit in, to make friends and socialize and distract all of the other students by talking. And so I sort of just let it go and explored a different way of seeing the world. Because when I was young, I would see fairies in the garden and talk about that, and I would know when people were in pain and manage that, and move their body around. As a child, I would go up to people and massage them, and everyone just went, "Oh, that's really sweet and actually really helpful. Like, oh, thank you, that you're really good at that. Where did you learn that?" And I was just like, "Shh, I'm listening because there's something stuck here and it needs to move out the arm." And
Wow.
then it wasn't really normal to continue that behavior. And then you sort of step into social norms of touch and it not being appropriate
Mm.
to touch other people. And so I think that was actually my first language of communication. My main love language is touch, and it was something that became dangerous and inappropriate and sexualized as well. And
Mm.
so I
Mm.
sort of felt at a bit of a loss because I would sing, I would write poetry, I would dance, and I would touch. And that was my method of communication. And then I needed to adapt to this: sit still, be quiet, don't express your opinion, which was how I made sense of it because I would express it and then they would come with feedback and, oh, okay. Whereas if I wasn't allowed to express, I just had to take in all of this information. I had to quiet my own thoughts to make space to pass the exams. And that was what was important. You've got to do the things. There's a tick box here that you need to check off. And so I sort of felt like a fish being judged by its ability to climb a tree.
That's a really nice analogy.
Yeah. It's like, okay, this test doesn't seem fair, but okay. I'll play along.
Throughout this, I mean, that's really, you were little, you were young, you were
I was
a
very young.
kid, you were a
Mm.
kid, and your mum obviously is a very tuned in woman, your
Yeah.
dad as well, too,
Yeah.
but in a different, more rational way, you would say.
Yes.
And and so were you sharing this, were you with your mum, or were you shutting up? Were you keeping it all on the inside?
I tried to express what I felt was indescribable at the time. I would repeatedly break down into tears and say, I want to go home. I want to go home. This place isn't my home. I don't want to be here. And I'd be sitting in my bedroom. My mum would say, you are home. This is your home. And I'd say, you're not my mother. You don't understand me. You
Mm.
can't hear me. I want to go home. And she would get upset as well and say, I know that you are a conscious being, and this is not your only life, and I'm sorry I'm not your favorite mother right now, but this time you came through my body and this is your home and this is where you are and we want you to be here. But she would have to convince me that things were real, I guess. I struggled to articulate because I felt like I could hear the cries for help from every unexpressed being that was present in the space and every space I'd ever been in. So I was like attuned to this kind of chaos soundtrack that no one else seemed to be able to hear, that I really wanted to do something about. I was like, can we turn this down? But no one else could hear it. And so I just felt this fear and sense of not belonging, confusion about why people were doing what they were doing, and they thought they made sense, but when you got down to it, they didn't even make sense to themselves, but they seemed to be okay with that. And so it was just it was very confusing. So I wrote a lot. I wrote a lot of poetry. I wrote a lot of songs. I did a lot of dances. So music is a huge healing modality for me, and it shifts things on a quantum level, you know, and so it doesn't really matter what we're saying because music transcends language.
Sound.
And so I sort of
Sound.
dabbled with guitar and things all of my life, but I would always make sound. I would always sing,
Mm.
but I would write poetry. And the problem, I guess, with that was I would share my poetry, which to me was very healing. What was happening for me, I know now. I was remembering past experiences and trying to filter through to the lesson of that life so that I could apply it to this life. And because I had so many lessons through the many experiences that I chose to participate in, I had a lot of data to go through that no one else was present with, but that was very present for me. It was like a memory that had happened in this life. It was more familiar to me than my own body experience. And so I would process these parts of myself, these memories presenting, and I would write them out in stories. And some of them were dark, and some of them were, you know, showed suicidal ideation. And so, which is just the idea of suicide. As I know that you know, you've
Yes.
I've
Yes.
said it before, and some people go, "What is that?"
Yeah.
So
No.
that's why I
No.
articulate. But you
Yeah.
know, there's a difference between suicidal ideation and intent. And
Yes.
I never actually intended to leave this space because I knew deep down, I always had hope that that it would come together because I could see a different way that it could be, and I just couldn't quite get it together. But I knew that I had a part in something, and I knew that I had a mission and a purpose, and I was trying to get it out. And so I knew that I had committed to being here, and I knew that there was a purpose and meaning to that. It was just when I was young, I could foresee all of the different experiences that were available to me to move through the lessons to embody the person I came to be. But I could
Mhm.
see that there was a lot in there that I didn't actually want to experience, but that I
Right.
had agreed to experience. And so I was resistant to what I knew was coming.
So it was an interesting sort of perspective that you had that wasn't, I don't want to say it was a predictive view. It was just an acknowledgement of the timeline
Yeah.
and the and what was going on,
Yeah.
what
I
was
did I did
about to go on
actually
for you, you know.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I did actually have a predictive ability.
Hmm.
There was one time I think I was 5 years old. I was asleep in the back of the car, and my whole family was in the car. And I woke up from a dead sleep, my parents say, and I woke up and I just said, "Stop the car, stop the car, stop the car." And I just kept repeating, "Stop the car." And I was clearly very panicked. And my dad was driving, and my mum said, "Bruce, maybe stop the car." And he's like, "She's asleep. Wait, is she just dreaming? What's happening?" "Stop the car! Stop the car!" And I just panicked and screamed. And mum goes, "Bruce, just stop the car." And he's looking ahead and there's a green light. But my panic caused them to react. And so my dad stopped. And then a big lorry or a truck went straight through the intersection. And it would have T-boned our car and killed our whole family, more than likely. And then I just went back to sleep.
Wow.
And that was kind of like, that sort of it describes what my life was if there was something that was happening where divine intervention needed to step in, I would be used as a vessel for that communication.
Hmm.
And that was often very awkward. I would say things to strangers that were very strange.
Yeah.
I would tell people about things about themselves or about their family member or about something that happened or was going to happen. And often I didn't really know what I was talking about, or I did. But it was at those times of there's a crucial danger that I never ever failed to switch into divine intervention mode, is what I guess I would call it, where
And
something takes over me that is in the highest good of what's occurring at that space and time.
it I guess it would have been almost like a double-edged sword, because it would have, you've got your poetry, which has got this suicide ideation going on with it, and this quirky, what many people would perceive as quite quirky child,
Yes.
um, being able to see things,
Yes.
perceive things,
Yes.
and articulate it quite
Yes.
clearly to
Yes.
them. So, that what did that add up to? I'm sensing you're around 12 or something like this at this age, or
Um,
or was it
yeah, so
younger?
I know before the age of 10, there's some debate about this. I want to confirm this with
Hmm.
my mum because I don't want to give false reports.
Hmm.
But I know that it was, to me, it was 10. Mum thinks maybe between 10 and 15, but it was pre-teen to teen. And my parents had done everything, really. They would take me to massage therapists and Reiki therapists and different things, but there was just this deep sadness within me and this just a deep sort of depression, anxiety, I guess, if you were to pathologize it, that was presenting. And so my parents, in love for me, wanted to see what they could do to ease my suffering because they couldn't really comprehend where it was coming from. And, I seemed by all accounts to have a very happy experience, and I was in a safe home and very loved and supported. And so they took me to a doctor, as you do with a child. And of course, the doctor didn't assess like what is her eating and sleeping, and maybe they did, but the end of that appointment was a prescription for antidepressants
Oh
before
my
the
goodness.
before I was a teenager. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I didn't want to take them, but I trusted, and I thought, okay, well, these are the caretakers, and the professionals, and so this is what is recommended for me. And so I took them, and I remember it cut me off from my intuition. So
Mhm.
it was like I couldn't hear anymore my internal guidance, and I had no compass, and everything needed to be done by my brain. And so I had to really learn to think my way through things that to me were very illogical. So it was like twisting myself into very complex yoga positions mentally to work out the answer to the behavior that was supposed to be expected. And I would look around at other people and see what they were doing and then follow along with that because I couldn't feel what was natural and organic to do. And so I tried my best to articulate that and
Wow.
said, look, I don't want to take this medication. I don't think it's helping. And they said, but you're doing really well. You seem to be improving, which was because I'd been adjusting my behavior because I felt like I got in trouble. There's something wrong with you. We need to fix it. So I was like, okay, I'll stop doing the things that you think are wrong. What are they? And then you'll take me off the medication. I can go back to being okay, because we're trying to fix me at the moment. There's obviously something wrong. So I stopped showing those behaviors, and stopped sharing my writing, which was, one of the early things that made it the fear of expressing, because there's a
Yes.
consequence for expression of the normal emotion of the human experience.
This is where
I
it ends up. This is how you,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah, they're
yeah,
compounding things as to why it
yeah.
becomes challenging to talk about how you really feel
Mm,
later on in life.
mm,
Um, and yeah, so I spoke with the doctor and I said, look, I don't want to be on this medication. And they said, try it out for another 6 months and see how you go because it seems to be working. And so I did that. And I went back and I said, look, I really would like to come off this medication. And they said again, well, you're doing so well, so you just stay on another 6 months. And I know that I don't recommend this to anyone, just to put that out there. I was a child, and I know that there are contraindications and things for stopping medications without weaning off and lessening the dose. But
mm,
that's what I
mm.
decided to do as a child. I didn't have awareness of those consequences, and I just dealt with them as they occurred. And I stopped taking my medication. And I pretended to take it for another 6 months. And then I went back to the doctor and I said, okay, so I'm feeling really good. I'm wondering if I could come off this medication. And he said, but you're doing so well and you should stay on it because everything's really working out for you. You've actually really improved in the last 6 months. And I said, yes, I know that I'm a child, but I do know myself. You need to listen to your patients. I stopped taking this medication 6 months ago. Mum, we're getting a new doctor. And I think I was probably somewhere between 10 and 15 at that age. And my mum was um, really, I think, saddened. I think she just felt like, oh, goodness, I'm trying to help my child. And did I do something wrong? And, they always were, the purity of their intention, I've never questioned in my life.
Sure.
Yeah. But this was just, how these things are managed when the assessments are being made upon some idea of normal that doesn't include the full spectrum of human emotion.
And can you remember, is there anyone else, on reflection that was probably dealing with similar, any other child like you around you, or did
Do
you
you
just
know,
not meet anyone?
interestingly, I have realized in a long time of retrospect that my sisters were experiencing
Mm.
similar things. And particularly my oldest sister, who I had no idea at the time that she was as similar to me as she is. And it took many, many experiences for us to come to that realization. And I see now, she tried to suppress me to protect me from what she had experienced because she went into school excited about the energy and the connectedness of all things and we're one being. And everyone crushed her and said, you're nuts. And she got bullied. And that didn't happen to me because she taught me to blend in a bit. And, at that time, I thought she was suppressing me. What I'm doing isn't okay. She also wanted to behave weirdly and talk about the things that we could experience and see. But she didn't feel like it was safe. So she felt a duty of care to keep me safe. And we've had a lot of discussions about how in our soul experiences, we are a protector for each other. And I do see that there are lots of those out there. And I think a lot of people experience some version of what I went through, and whether they're medicated or not, but just that there seems to be something inherently wrong with them, and that something needs
Mm.
to be done to fix that.
It's calling to mind for me, young woman who was, she was diagnosed with imposter syndrome,
Oh, yes. That's an interesting
and
one.
and at the time, I thought, well, I think I've always had that.
Yeah.
They've given it a name. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but it's really interesting to call it a syndrome.
Mm.
Like there is an issue around not feeling like you're from here,
Yeah.
or part of the norm,
Yes.
and and I suspect, and I don't know, and you might have met more people now at your time of life now that actually we're going through the same thing.
A lot
And
now. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's my mission essentially, is to seek out the others. And the ones that went through it at a similar kind of timeline to me are at this process now of stepping into leadership and becoming the safe spaces that they needed because they have experienced their own unique version of suffering.
Mm,
And I say suffering with inverted,
yeah.
suffering is very real. I've experienced a lot of it. And I've learned pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. And the suffering is it's sort of how we respond to pain. But these people who have gone through these experiences are very well equipped to know how to prevent another doing the same, and
Mm,
another being um, miscomprehended and misguided. And so, what I see now when I meet these people is that they have become, in some way, whether it's they're a mother or a father, and they're creating a safe environment for their child to curiously explore who they are, and to unfold, and really letting the child lead in a sense, or who are working with children. I've got a friend who's a synergetic play therapist, which is on the forefront of quantum physics and neuroscience. And essentially, she locks on to the most dysregulated nervous system in the space, which often is the parent. And
Mm.
her job shifts sometimes from monitoring the nervous system of the child to seeing the patterns of behavior that are occurring in the parent that are impacting the child. And, you know, so we kind of, children who go through this develop a really amazing sensory perception on what to avoid and how to stay safe. So my whole life was built around how do I assimilate and fit in? And then that's a process, and that is something that's helpful now to help others avoid
Mm.
compressing and limiting themselves and their expression, because we can sort of see where and why that's happening. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people, especially with the schooling system, have gone through these experiences. And I meet a lot of them now, yeah, that are working on being the person they needed, that someone that they could communicate with in the way that they were able to communicate back then.
Mm. And I
Yeah.
guess your first experience with Reiki was that with the Reiki master was to say, I'm going to need help. You
Yes.
saw it. You saw that you were going
Yes.
to need tools to get
Yes.
you through this. But there was, well, and there was, I don't want to say but,
Mhm.
there was some wonderful ways that it manifested for you. Just tell us a little bit about, I'm going to talk to your work life when you went into
Mhm.
become to working stage where am I correct in saying actually and I'm going to call them gifts, we've all got gifts, and
Mm.
your ability to see was actually your superpower
Yeah.
in that way. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So
And
I had a series of different jobs, and my main career job was 11 years within the emergency services, call taking and dispatching ambulances. And I found my it was very interesting because it really helped me to learn to read a room that I was not in, because someone drops in to your experience, you get no
mm,
warning, it's just ding, emergency services, and you need to quickly ascertain what's happening. Is there any scene safety issues? And your job there is to take control of the situation so that they can come to a state of calm and be effective in the assistance that they're trying to render. And I found myself aware of things within the space that I hadn't been alerted to in a traditional way, like knowing where a defibrillator might be and knowing where the ambulance was going to come, even though I wasn't dispatching it and I didn't have that information third dimensionally or through my traditional senses. No one had told me through sound or sight,
mm,
but I just knew, oh, it's going to come to the back gate, so make sure you send someone there. And there were a few instances where that way of seeing something or having awareness of something saved time in terms of having an impact on someone's ability to survive that situation,
mm,
um, which was really interesting because I thought, again, at that time, I still just sort of thought, oh, that's quite natural. You can hear sounds within the room. Everyone's able to do that. And yeah, I had a few people come to me and say if my family were to call, I would hope that they would get you. And that was really surprising to me because I never really thought of myself as good at anything. Imposter syndrome, as you
mm,
say, So I always had this
mm,
idea there's something wrong with me. I'm not as effective, or my methods aren't um, the right way.
mm.
But yeah, I ended up sort of changing a lot of things from the inside there as to um, things in the space that weren't feeling right as well, um, and addressing kind of the energy in the environment there,
Mm.
because it's an environment that can very easily facilitate post-traumatic growth, which is a very real thing that is extremely undermentioned. And it also can facilitate post-traumatic stress disorder. So the
Go into that a little bit
opportunity,
more. Go into that a little bit more.
yeah, so the opportunity
Uh,
there is that anything that causes a dysregulation of the nervous system, if we're not able to conceptualize and self-soothe or soothe that within a community, like a co-regulation of the nervous system. So if we can't self-regulate or co-regulate that experience, then we kind of flag that as something to avoid, and it causes a stress because we don't know how to manage that situation.
Mm.
And so this presentation of the activation of the nervous system and then it not being soothed, and then activating the nervous system, then not being soothed and going home without debriefing. And then there's a culture in there of if you show emotion, you're lacking resilience.
Wow.
And, they offer mental health services, but if you go to them, there's some sort of stigma depending, and this is my humble opinion and personal experience. And I know that there's a lot of really wonderful things that happen within these spaces. To me, it's an unfortunate loss of an ability to use those events to grow, where we can bond together in community. If we have experienced something that all of us have had a dysregulation, and we can come together
Mm.
and reflect upon that and take lessons from what happened. Like, wow, that was a really intense day. What did we learn about this? What went well? Did we feel supported? Was there something that we could do better next time? Because that was quite significant. And then
Mm.
you use it as a bonding experience. Whereas what I was finding was there would be a big event, there would be no debriefing. You would go home, you weren't supposed to talk about it, confidentiality, and then you would be trying to process that yourself. And if you try and tell someone, it's upsetting to them. And
Mm.
then you've got to deal with their dysregulation because you've expressed something to them which has caused distress to them. And you're then sort of responsible for that dissonance that you've created there. So having spaces where it's possible to come together and discuss what we're actually feeling, like, wow, that really impacted me, that just happened. And I actually feel scared to take another call. Me too. Oh gosh, I thought I was the only one. There's a normalization, and then there's camaraderie. Look how brave we are. We're all going to get in there and take our next call. You go, I'm on the phone. Yeah. You can make it into a bonding experience rather than suppressing the emotion, which we know if it's not expressed, energy and motion, it's going to densify. There's a metaphysical element. It moves its way down into the body. And there's a lot of people from that workplace that committed suicide, and there's a lot that got cancer, and it's unexpressed energy. Um, so
Do you know if that's still the case? I mean, you're not there now, but
yes,
is that still the case?
to the best of my knowledge, yes. I actually went very deep into trying to make changes within this space.
Mm.
I experienced bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, stalking, different things, which were reported, and it was suppressed by the company. They knew about it 6 months earlier. And by the time I reported it, their response was, this is the first time we're hearing this information, which I thought was a very strange response, because if it's the first time you're hearing something, you don't normally say that. It's just obvious. And then I sort of found out that they knew. So I think there's a lot of systemic issues, which
Mm.
there are many, many, many individuals who have a beautiful, pure intention to make change. And it does get lost in bureaucracy sometimes, and
Mm.
the work
Mm.
politics. And, I think that there's an ignorance, which is a willful ignorance, because if we see how much what's happening in there is impacting everyone, it becomes too hard to participate in it. And so there's sort of a chosen blindness, I think, or perhaps more accurately, perhaps they can't see a different way that it
Mm.
works. And that's a
Mm.
gift, to see different elements in a space and see how they
Mm.
might come together differently to have a different outcome is it's change. And a lot of
Yeah.
people are resistant to change because it's going into an unknown.
Yeah. Hopefully, with the shift in the world and in the consciousness level now, I'm hoping that you and maybe others can feed back to
Yeah.
into this particular incredibly important
Yes. Yeah.
facility that
Yeah.
humanity needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
It's a really
and
important and
yeah,
rewarding
yeah,
job to be in, and to be in
yeah.
service is such a blessing. And such a beautiful, it is such a beautiful environment from one perspective. And there's, in a lot of organizations and situations, there's a dissonance and a resonance. There's a dark side and
Mm,
a light side.
mm,
And so I think, the whistleblowers, the people that actually come forward and say, hi, this is what's really happening. I'm just going to shine a torch in the corner over there. That was, I think, helpful to bring things to light. And I personally would happily rehabilitate to the best of my ability
mm,
the people involved in the sexual harassment. I
mm,
would happily talk to them and come to a perspective that we can both see as to me identifying what behavior I contributed to whatever was occurring, as well as them seeing theirs. And I think it's a conflict resolution process that's missing in a lot of
mm,
spaces. That
mm.
there's an avoidance of confronting things, which comes back to the whole point of my childhood being challenging, was that I wanted to be in truth. And my mum has been called uncompromisingly honest. And I'm the same. It doesn't really matter whether that truth reflects poorly upon me or is uncomfortable or awkward. I would like it expressed because that's what's
Mm.
actually happening. And better we deal with it that way. And I don't think that everyone has that same mentality. It's a
Yeah.
very confronting, it's like I'm unique in a lot of senses that recovering from traumas and re-exposing myself to triggers. I'm the kind of person with exposure therapy. If I had a fear of swimming, I would run to the beach and jump in the ocean to prove that it's fine. And I've been told it's not the normal way to go about it. Normally, you go to the pool and you see the water and then you dip a toe in. And, so some people aren't as comfortable being confronted with the truth or with their fear
Mm,
or with reality.
mm.
And so there's sort of a way that the dance needs to be done, that the
Yeah.
conversation needs to occur for it to be positive or intending to move towards something harmonious.
And I would hope that it would happen from within the organization too. There's an understanding, okay, as you said, what can we do better? What can we do
Exactly.
better here? Simple as
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
And that would be the beautiful start point for that particular environment
Yeah.
to actually move into a space where at least they're minimizing
Yeah.
these the effects
Yeah.
of a really confronting job.
Yeah. In any situation, to come to a resolution is to acknowledge a conflict. Because
Mm,
otherwise, what are we discussing? And so both parties need to agree that there exists something between the two of them, that there's an energy or an occurrence or something, that there's a gap.
mm.
And that needs to be recognized in order to be worked upon. And so, yeah, I went through the process of trying to bring that in and bring awareness to these things. And I know that I left some ripples and I made an impact. And I trust that the work continues regardless. I know that there are other beings who are, social justice warriors in there who really deeply care about the individuals and the organization. And so, yeah, I just sort of surrender that to a divine will there. And
We've got other work
yeah,
to do. That's fine.
yeah,
We go
exactly.
on. We go on. And so after that, I think am I right in the trajectory? You went backpacking. Is that correct?
Yeah, so when I was 21, I was working at the emergency services and I went for a 3-month trip overseas. And I went to Southeast Asia. And so I was traveling by myself and I met some beautiful people and got an overnight train to Koh Samui Island in Costa Rica, in directionally challenged Koh Samui
Mm.
Island in Thailand. And yeah, I had a very unusual experience occur there. I was with 8 other men they were just traveling from America. We'd all come together and we were out for the evening. I'd gotten up on a stage and performed and was singing. And then on the way home, I vanished. So my friend was standing there. The last thing I said to him was, hurry up, I'm not walking home by myself. And he heard his name called. So he turned around and when he looked back, I was gone. And so for me, I woke up on the floor of a bathroom and I'd been paralyzed.
Oh, God.
So I'd been injected or dosed with something, and I had 2 head injuries. So I'd had a concussion from being struck on the back of my head first, And then I had woken up in the process of being relocated. And then they had struck me a second time on the front of my head, which knocked me unconscious again. And yeah, when I woke up on the floor of the bathroom, I had no idea where I was. It was freezing cold and pitch black. And I remember that was the first time as an adult that I had a really strong awareness of voices that I would say were not my own, that really presented in two different sort of discussions. And one of them said, go back to sleep, everything's fine, you're just tired. And the other one said, everything is not fine. This is fight time. This is alarm bells. Get up, get off the floor, don't go back to sleep. And I sort of sat there quite confused, being like, I thought I was in Thailand and it was meant to be warm and it's cold. I don't know what's happening. And I was very innocent minded. And so I had no
And
idea.
possibly concussed.
Yes, concussed and drugged.
Yeah.
And my pupils were dinner plates, and it was very, very unusual experience. I managed to stay awake, and I eventually was able to move. It felt like that scene out of Kill Bill. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's paralyzed. She's in the car and she's saying, wiggle your big toe, and her toe won't move. And she just keeps trying to wiggle her toe. It was like that, regaining autonomy over my body. I was like, move your hand. And I really had to find where my hand was and communicate with it to move. And eventually I managed to stand. And yeah, I was in a bathroom with a padlock on the door and armed police officers outside. And so I managed to break a window by throwing a brick at the window. There were just 4 small windows on the door. And so I was still quite innocent at this point, and I just thought I've fallen in the bathroom and hit my head or something, and I'm just going to go back out, and I'm a bit embarrassed that that happened, but I hadn't even been drunk, and I was on my way home, and so it didn't really make sense. But, and the voice or my higher self, the communication that was very clear to me, I can say it that way, the communication that was very clear to me was, you need to stay regulated or your brain is not going to function properly, and you need to be able to think clearly, so please don't panic. And I was like, okay, this feels like an appropriate time to panic, but it was very clear, no, you need to stay, like, keep your breathing regular, and like, you need to get out of this situation. We need you cognitive to do that. And so despite the confusion from the head injuries and the substance that was involuntarily put into my body, I managed to break a window, found a padlock, saw that there were guards, screamed for help. They came over, noticed that I was awake. And at first I thought, oh, great, they're going to let me out. And then they went back and sat down and started making phone calls. And then each time one of them got off the phone, a bar nearby, the music got louder. And so I realized that they were trying to drown out the sounds of me trying to escape. And that was when I realized, okay, I don't think we're in a good situation. And I sort of had 2 assessments. I thought, I'm either being harvested for organs or I'm being sold to the sex trade. And I realized afterwards it was the sex trade. And so they had been following me since I arrived at the island, and had waited for a moment, learned my friend's name to call his attention away from me, and then taken me when I was standing with my back to an alleyway. So, yeah. And
how did you get out?
Yes, I managed to scream for about, I think it was 6 to 8 hours. And I was moving through a process of, I wasn't sure the best way to get attention, whether that was sound or visuals. So I was looking through the hole and then reaching my arm out to see if I could reach the light, because there was a light above the door that shone out on the street. So I could barely even see my own hand in front of my face. But I thought if I could reach the light, then I might get there. But it was actually what I really feel was divine intervention that helped, in the form of a ladyboy. So it was forgive me for the terminology interruptions here, but it was a male-born person who has identified as a female and arrived with a wig or very long, beautiful hair, stunning makeup, heels, short skirt, walked down towards the door and said, "Why are you in there?" And I said, "I don't know." And I was crying and I said, "Do you speak English?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "If you leave me, I will die. I need your help, please." And she said, "What do I do?" And I had tried to push the door, but the door stopper was on the other side. So it opened out sorry, it opened in. And so I was kicking against the door jamb. And so I said, you know, please kick the door down if you can. You need to open the door. And she looked around at the guards, and I wasn't sure if they were going to help or not. And then, yeah, ultimately she said, okay, I will help, I promise, and looked me in the eyes. And she said, step back from the door. And so I trusted and I stepped back. And then I heard this 1, 2, 3, and shoe on the door. There was a heel print on the door. The door completely busted off its hinges. The padlock broke open. And I remember stepping out into the street, and it felt like the first breath I had ever taken of like freedom. And I then remember reporting the story to other people and saying there was someone screaming. It was like just banshee screaming woman somewhere. And someone said to me, was it you? And I went, oh, it was me, you know? And so,
Can you tell me
yeah, that took.
what happened with the guards? Obviously didn't stop her.
So the guards were, I witnessed them when people were trying to pass in the street, they would come up to them. And if the person sort of looked down, they would usher them along. And I don't know exactly how the lady boy made her way down, and she was aware of them. So she looked, I couldn't see them at that point, but she did look and they were there. And so I think her assessment was we were on a relatively main road. So I was in a holding cell, and their intention would be to relocate me. Right. So after discussions and some investigations, there's two different types of sex trade. One is opportunistic, if you're drunk or drugged alone and you're easy target. And the other is they have someone who's presented with specifics. We would like this height, eye color, accent, whatever. And so they had actually tracked us. And so these people were there just to guard the body that was meant to be unconscious. And so I believe that they were calling for backup, but there was a potential, you know, alarm being raised, and they would have caused a lot of a scene if they had have used their weapons in the street. There would have been other tourists around.
Right.
And so I feel that at that point they were like, let's just cut our losses, because that's, for starters, they were like, that's not my job. It's not my job to deal with an awake person. I'm here guarding a unconscious body, and the body's awake now, and that's not my problem.
Right.
So I think that they had their role, and I was fortunate because the person that I had been traveling with, because I said, I'm not going home by myself, hurry up, he circled the block for about 4.5 hours and kept saying, where's my friend? Where's my friend? Where's my friend?
Okay, I was wondering where their boys were, where
yes,
the guys were.
So they had all gone home, and I was with only one of them at that time. And so, yeah, he walked around for 4.5 hours, and he said she just said she's not going home by herself. And he'd only known me a few days, and he wandered around. He eventually went back to wake up the other boys, but he plugged his phone into charge and then fell asleep because it was approaching sunrise. And yeah, when I got out, I ended up on the back of a German couple's motorbike, and they were trying to help me to find my way home because I'd tried, my phones had gone flat, and in the room there was a deadener, so you couldn't use internet or your phone. And so it was, you know, rendered useless. And across the street, I wasn't able to turn my phone on because it had gone flat. So I didn't know where I was staying. I didn't know how to get home. The only phone number I could think of was my mother. And I thought, there's no way I'm calling my mum. Hi, mum, it's me. I'm over here. Everything's not fine. So, yeah, I went.
Jade,
You
could have called your mum.
Can you imagine? She would have been like, oh, but where are you? Oh, I don't know. You know? No, thank you. So my mum knew. My mum had a knowing. She kept contacting me after that and saying, what's going on? What's going on? And I said to her, don't worry, I'm safe. And she said, Jade, you have never said in your life, I'm safe, which means you weren't safe. Tell me what happened. And I said, I'll tell you when I come home. But my response to that, the next morning, I went into shock. So I ended up finding where I was staying through this very drunk German couple, this very drunk guy and his girlfriend who had a fight. And I thought, I've escaped this to be on this motorbike journey. But I made my way back, and the first thing I said to him was, you left me. And he burst into tears, and then I went into shock. And so in the morning, I sort of thought that everything was funny, and I didn't know that it was real. And it was very important that we found the holding cell, because
Mm.
there was I don't know how much to share, but there was, bloody handprints and footprints, and
Oh gosh.
the broken door, and my shoes were tucked behind the toilet. And I think if I hadn't rediscovered that existed, and there were these men with me who looked at me and said, "Oh my goodness, like you're in shock. This isn't okay. Like we need to get you out of here." If that hadn't happened, I don't know that I would have believed it was real,
Mm. Mm.
because it was just so far out there that if I hadn't found the location, I don't, yeah, I feel like it would have, it really helped to integrate it, that there were other people there. And years later, I've called them and said, "Did this really happen? Are you sure?" And they validate that for me. And yeah, absolutely, I was there. And, but it was just
Mm.
such a far out experience.
Far out and traumatic. And so you continue traveling?
I did. My response was I had been traveling for 3 months, and I had been, I say independent, we're codependent species.
Mm.
However, at that time, my thought was, I'm a strong, independent woman, and I came here a strong, independent person, and I need to leave the same. And this was that inner knowing that I knew the work that I am to do is not just in Australia. And I knew that if I left while that was a state of stress, and I had not regulated myself and regulated my nervous system at all, and went straight home, that it would be very challenging for me to leave that space again, to trust that I was safe. And so I extended my trip by 3 weeks. I spoke to the head of the Australian Embassy, who offered to expatriate me immediately on a private jet, plane, boat, whatever. Gave me his wife's phone number and his phone number, and he said, "I think you're nuts staying." And I said, "Thank you, I appreciate that." And I stayed, and these men changed their plans, and all of them traveled with me. And I ended up going home after I said to them, "I need to go and get my nails done now." And they said, "Okay," and jumped up to come with me. They would stand in my sunlight, and I'd be like, "Hello, I'm trying to tan. Can you move?" And they're like, "No, we're keeping you safe." And we
Oh,
went to a
oh.
full moon party, and I got annoyed that they were being protective. I was just very free spirited, and I was like, "You're being too overpowering," and tried to run away, and they spear tackled me. Like, they were amazing, amazing humans. And yeah, they traveled around until I said, "I need to go do this by myself." And they said, "Well, just wait a bit." And then they positioned themselves to sort of be nearby so that they could monitor to make sure that I was okay. But the important thing was that I felt I had done it on my own.
Yeah.
And so they allowed me to be under the illusion that I was alone. And then I realized, okay, so I'm not terrified of foreign places anymore. I can walk around by myself. So I can go home now knowing that that place exists, that is safe away from here. And then I went back to work, and that was the time I did some career moves within there, and then was working for a bit longer before I took that big year break. So that trip when I went away for 13 months shocked a lot of people, because I went by myself again to foreign countries and traveled around, because I knew that that was where I needed to be, and that the people that I was looking for were in specific places and specific times.
For your tribe in many
Yes,
ways.
yes. Yeah, I feel like we're all, I feel like the secret is that we're all the one tribe, and the way that it works is when we each find our unique expression. And in that expression is when we can be seen, so that the others who are looking for what we're expressing can find us. And it takes a great bravery to be in that expression. And so I've naturally been drawn to a lot of people who express themselves differently. And so, um, yeah, on my travels, I've been to 38 countries now, and yeah, I've met a series of very interesting people with very similar intentions, and different perspectives, but that when we come together, sort of see this more grand, divine, higher consciousness that is attempting to move through us, and for us to kind of work out how to embody that energy that's moving through. And when you're trying to work out how to express an energy that potentially hasn't been expressed in that way, it's a very awkward experience. It can be ancestral rage. It can be, you know, sacred sexuality. It can be intense joy and humor, which can present like mania. It can be extreme sadness. And in this
Mm.
world in Australia, I found it limiting to be in my full expression, because when I did that here, it's seen as a mental health problem. And when I've done this overseas, other shamans have come forward and said, oh, you're a shaman, you're a healer. That's why so how our environment responds and reacts rather. It's more reactivity. How the environment reacts to us is very important. So I was very mindful about who to expose myself to, in that I know the influence that the environment has upon an individual, from a cellular level to behavior to absolutely everything. It's all intertwined. So I was very mindful about where I placed myself and who I was in resonance with, and so I needed these people that were doing things in a different way. And so I sort of went on a lifelong explorative journey to find other individuals in unique presentations.
And here we are back in Australia in a
Mm-hmm.
very pivotal time. And
Yes.
and really I think what I'd love to hear from you is, for now, what that adds up to for now,
Yeah.
because it's an ongoing journey. It's
Yes.
not,
Yeah.
and as it is with us all, but the relevance of all you've learnt and experienced so far, how that could help someone else.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm very much here to normalize the human experience, in that it is challenging to take care of a human animal, especially when this animal is running off a series of classical conditioning programs that are not aligned with its instinct. And so, through learning the framework of shamanism that I know others are operating by, that I've witnessed in my own journey as something that was very expansive and very healing for me. So I intend to create a space and a platform for me to step into, to invite others to share themselves. Because my intention is to be a conductor. And often the conductor makes no sound. So the conductor guides the others to bring their sound forward. And so I intend to step in and make sound, because I think that needs to be done to break the barrier.
Mhm.
So, I've done a lot of expression about the things that have occurred in my experience. And my intention always is to speak on the wisdom of the trauma, and how these things that create dissonance within us are an opportunity to come to resonance. I have always known that it's not a solo operation. And so it's finding the others. And that's what we're all doing. Is, finding you is such a blessing. And you're on this journey of bringing forward the truth as you see it. And you're doing, you're embodying that. You're inviting people in to share
Mm.
their stories and to
Mm.
connect with you and an audience and each other through
And
that.
that, and I'm really happy that their stories, like your story, it's not quite sewn up, and
Yeah.
that's quite beautiful actually, and that's really approachable for someone who, whatever's happened, and can perhaps go, there's an ally, there's someone I can talk to, that's
Yeah.
someone I can,
Yeah.
oh, I want to know them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be putting your, some sort of way to contact you into the
Absolutely.
story notes. But is there anything that you would love to um, leave everyone with? A sage bit of advice from
Okay.
Ayadé.
Okay. I think the core message that I've always carried is don't lose hope. It's no matter how dire the situation is, there's always a learning. Everything that happens is an experience that I, at some point in my consciousness, requested to experience, to give myself an opportunity to respond in a new way. And so seeing it as this curious puzzle of, why would I create this experience for myself? If I was the universe trying to teach me a lesson, and I'm the one that asked for the lesson, how would I communicate that in a way that I could understand? And try and work out that you are working with educating yourself. And there's a difference because we create from the vibration we put out. So if I'm in fear and I put out, oh, it could go that way, it could go that way, the universe sees that as a request. You'd like to experience these? Okay. And I go, no, 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 wait. Instead of like, how bad could it go? How good could it get? What's the best that could happen in this situation? And to find those elements and look at them with hope, and to say, you know, I have all of these broken pieces of a life, and I really, you know, I trust that I can make this into something, and I hope it works. And ultimately, what we're guided on beyond that is a deep knowing, because we don't really need faith. You know, I don't have faith that I'm human. I know that I'm human. And so I don't have faith that it will work out. I know that it will work out. I've surrendered to the how it happens, and I'm hopeful that the journey is something that I, you know, enjoy, and also knowing that it's going to have chaos, it's going to have dark and light, but I'm always looking for hope.
Beautiful. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jade. That's such a beautiful message to end on. And
Yeah.
thank you so much. And watch this space. We'll get you back.
Yeah, I feel like
I
we have
want
about 1,000
updates.
more stories to go into every time we chat. It's great.
More is great, and there will be updates, which will be really fun. And so thank you deeply.
Thank you. Thank you
And
for the work that you've done on yourself to become the person that can hold the space that you do, because it's challenging to express our truth when we don't feel supported. And, you know, the supportive space that you're offering to people to share their story and making that available to others who might benefit from that, it's just such a beautiful bridge. And I really honor the work that you're
thank
doing
you.
and that you have done. And yeah, thank you
Thank
for having
you.
me on. Yeah.
Thank you, my darling.
Yeah.
And have a beautiful
Thank you
rest of
so
your day,
much.
and let's speak very soon. I
Yes,
love you.
beautiful. Thank you. I love you so much. Thank
From
you.
my
Thank you.
heart.